Renee's life unraveled when she was only 11 years old. That's when she found out her father had killed her mother in a way that was just stone cold. And the woman she thought was her mother was really her mother's mother and not her own. And for all 11 years of her life, it was her mother that was unknown. Her father had beaten her mother viciously with a tire iron until she was dead. And even though Renee never witnessed the crime, she couldn't get the images from her head. And she was angry at everybody because she felt at some point they should have told her. She found out by overhearing a conversation, and then it seemed like this knowledge began to mold her. It was a rage that was ignited and an attitude that said, I don't care. And she wasn't willing to talk about it because all the roads led to a life unfair. She was prepared to unleash her anger on anyone that got in her way, and she wasn't about to listen to what anyone had to say. And that's when all the trouble started that landed her in group homes and institutions. It was like she was trying to pay back the world she believed owed her some restitution. At 21, she was pregnant and incarcerated for trafficking drugs. But she hoped to be able to raise her daughter with kisses and with hugs. And they transferred her to an Aboriginal healing center once she had given birth. And as she looked at the tiny life in her arms, she was the most beautiful thing on this earth. Yet the old life was still calling her, and so she took some Valium and smoked some pot. And then the institution's response to her was far greater than she would ever have thought. They took her light away from her when they turned her child over to the hands of her sister. They never bothered to think this through, how much she would agonize while she missed her. She broke the rules, and that was it. There was no space for a second chance. And they didn't think how this would affect her or the inner violence it would enhance. Her first response was to escape, hoping she could make her way to her daughter. But all she got was more time because that's all her attempt bought her. And she had taken a hostage, so the sentence was pretty grim. And any chance of raising her daughter now suddenly became very dim. And that's what it took to finally break her and make her just not care. She reached the only conclusion she could, that life was just unfair. And she never tried to defend herself, she always accepted a guilty plea. It was like she figured, why bother trying, she would still have to pay the fee. Or perhaps she realized she'd get no justice, so why give them the upper hand? Why hope for something better from a system that clearly couldn't understand? And so she went to war with the system that held her against her will. They might be able to hold her physically, but it was her spirit they couldn't kill. She would fight them at every chance, hold them hostage to the prisoner's demands. She would not fight in their courts of law, that's not where she would make her stand. They responded by locking her up in solitary, where she would spend more than 7 years. They handcuffed and shackled her when they had to move her, which only identified all their fears. They eventually designated her a dangerous offender, which essentially said they now owned her. They were obviously also engaged in the war, so there was no sympathy that they loaned her. She spent time taking courses to educate herself with a mind that was keen to learn. She would become a more knowledgeable and formidable opponent in order to fight them at every turn. And they would just not get it that they'd made an enemy out of her, that when they took her child away, they built a resistance they couldn't conquer. They recreated the same fate, a child believing her auntie was her mother, while her mother fought behind cell walls, left to be just someone other. But their minds weren't sophisticated enough to see the pattern they set in motion, because they could only operate from a position of punishment minus any emotion. This whole mess could have been avoided if only they had the humanity to see that a young mother needed a second chance to be the loving mother she could be. That drug use is a coping behavior for those born of a traumatic past. That if you help traumatized people work through this, then the addiction will not last. But the correctional system isn't interested in anything that is correct, and it hides behind a false belief that it's society that it protects. But when you punish people whose history has derailed them, then the only thing you do is become one more that has failed them. And you do no favors for anyone else because you just create a more dangerous person. When you take away someone's reason for living, then it's those around them whose lives worsen. And if you thought you could break the spirit of Renee Ackerby, then you've obviously made a mistake. All you've done is strengthen her resolve to fight you when you left her with a mother's heartache. And you destroyed another generation, a child that didn't deserve that fate. What happens when she finds out who her mother is, and will it already be too late? Will she respond with an inner rage at the injustice that was delivered her, that her mother was left in shackles, just another thing that belittled her? And when she acts out in anger, will you respond the way you always do? Will you lock her up in your institutions because that's the limit of your worldview? You call this woman a dangerous offender, but I'm going to ask you what made her that way. In a system that operates from sheer ignorance, there'll be no truth in what you have to say. You took away her child and then you took away her life, but you can't understand why she'd grab one of you and hold you at the point of a knife. Everyone that's met Renee says she's an intelligent woman with a lot of potential, but you wasted her life like her worth was just incidental. And you'll never admit you're wrong. You'll destroy your life to prove you're right, because you're the big bad correctional system and you all have the might. But you don't think others don't see you for the pathetic system that you are, that you take a life that had value and leave nothing but an angry scar? When will you get an education on what makes people angrily act out? When will you ever help people deal with what's hurt them and find out what it's all about? When will you stop locking people up in a cage while expecting them to come out better? When will you try to understand women like Renee, because it's clear you've never met her?